I'm Matt McClure, and this is Currents. It's a special edition of Currents as we look at the upcoming changes to the Mass. First up, you've got questions, they have answers.
I think some people are going to be a little resistant to it and frustrated, but for the most part, I think, just with time and repetition, we'll get used to it.
Plus, St. John's University takes an in-depth look at the new translation and what it means for you.
It seems to me that it was quite a substantially good revision.
And along with the new Mass comes new music. We'll get a preview of The Sound of My People.
The Universal Church and its leadership, they're looking for us to bring that vitality with more precise and well-rooted interpretations and translations in the liturgy.
Well, good evening. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. Can you just feel it in the air, folks? We have officially launched into the 2011 fall holiday season. Can't believe it, but it's a fact that is even more evident today because you probably got a day off from work or from school as we observe Columbus Day. And that is only the beginning, because pretty soon spooky scarecrows and pumpkins will become a normal part of our landscape. And once the scarecrow's been packed away and the last turkey leg has been turned into a sandwich, many of you will be preparing for the next big thing. That's right, you got it, the November 27th introduction of the Revised English Mass at a parish near you. Didn't know about it, did you? Well, let's keep on listening here, because the first Sunday of Advent this year, the Revised English Mass will be celebrated for the very first time here in the U.S. That means new responses and even the removal of some of the language you've been reciting for decades. Clergy, lay leaders, and the faithful have all been preparing for this change. No decorations required, as early as last year. And that includes this group of curious parishioners at Our Lady of Mount Carmel Parish in the Bronx.
It's funny that some of the people who have for 40 years been pushing every reform possible all of a sudden have become arch conservatives. They don't want change now. Within a year or so, we will be having a new translation of the Mass in English. And Father Rapaglia, the pastor of Mount Carmel here in the Bronx, decided it would be a good idea to introduce the people to the big picture of the revision of the texts of the Mass. Now, what Jesus says is, judge, but make sure you're in position to judge. For the people, the changes are minimal, and that was deliberately designed that way so that the prayers that they've grown comfortable in reciting, for the most part, will not be changed. The most notable for them will be the response to "The Lord be with you," which for the past 40 years has been "and also with you," and they will be responding "and with your spirit," which is a more accurate translation and more theologically precise. The Mysterium Fidei, the priest will simply say, "the mystery of faith." There is no "let us proclaim" in the Latin. And because the English had that mistake, it also led to a strange thing in some parishes and dioceses whereby the deacon was saying that. The intention of the new translation was, first of all, that it correspond more accurately to the original Latin text. Secondly, that the English that is used would be more beautiful, elegant, elevated, sacral, rather than the rather pedestrian texts that we've had that were produced in a rushed moment in the immediate aftermath of Vatican II. Various forces took hold of processes in the church such that vernacular liturgy became normative, and the very bad translation that was effected as a result of their work. Then, by 2001, the Holy See saying, we've got to revamp all of this because it's gotten completely out of control. So let's go back to the drawing board, start from scratch, and this is what has produced, that process is what produced the text that we've been looking at today. The minute you go to a vernacular liturgy, you automatically open the door to a regular revision because living languages, contemporary languages, change. all kinds of words had a particular meaning 40 years ago that they no longer do. It's one of the advantages of using a so-called dead language is that those meanings don't change from generation to generation. I'm very comfortable with the text that we have been given at this point. It's not a perfect text. No translation is perfect. No liturgical text, even the original Latin, is perfect. But it's a vast improvement over what we've been using for the past 40 years. I think when it's properly presented and a good, firm catechesis is given, not simply this is what it is, but here's why it is. And it is engaging both the intellect and the will of the people so that these texts become their own.
Well, there is much more of this special edition of Currents ahead. When we return, a group of young adults in Brooklyn takes matters into their own hands, and they commandeer a church and a priest for a lesson on the new Mass. Welcome back to a special edition of Currents as we take a look at the upcoming new Mass. Well, young adults and the Mass. Depending on which day of the week it is or where you get the news from, the statistics on young adult Mass attendance are usually pretty grim. We hear it all the time. Young people are moving away from the church. They are less religious and more spiritual. You hear that, all the time. So it might come as a bit of a surprise to you to learn that some young adults right here in the Diocese of Brooklyn flipped the script and took matters into their own hands to have the Mass and the upcoming Mass changes explained to them. Yeah. Earlier this year, the enterprising, Mass-attending young adults of the Brooklyn CYA met at the Oratory Church of St. Boniface in downtown Brooklyn in an evening dedicated to the Mass, its past, and its future.
When we're doing what can seem to be the same thing over and over again, something beautiful and meaningful and so important can lose some of its meaning if it becomes something that we're just doing over and over again. We can think how often we make the sign of the cross and how often do we really stop and think about what we're doing when we make the sign of the cross.
It's important to know what happens in the Mass and the meaning of it, because people may not come to church under other circumstances during the week. Coming to a Sunday Mass, I feel as though it will really enhance their celebration and their relationship with God if they have an understanding of the history of the Mass, of why we do what we do as Catholics. So Kevin Sweeney is going to be talking to us about the basics and also possibly some of the upcoming changes that are going to be happening in the Mass. Maybe give us an overview of what's happening and why those changes are being made.
In the altar, we see not only the table where the Last Supper was celebrated, where we celebrate with Jesus around the table that Passover meal, but also this is the altar of the cross where his body is broken and his blood is poured out. There's certainly, unfortunately, for different reasons amongst our Catholic people, many don't have a good intellectual appreciation of what is happening at the Mass or even the words of the prayers. We need to help our people to understand the Mass and to encourage people to do that as fully and as consciously as they can is, an ongoing challenge. I want to say a few words on the changes, which I'll give you something on that in a moment. We're going to be told, in a sense, that the Lord be with you. The Lord be with you? No. And with your spirit. There was a need to look at the words that we say, the words that we use, and try to make a few changes so that we are closer to the original text of the Mass. And using certain words or changing certain words is an attempt to be who we're called to be as the one body of Christ.
Well, actually, for me, the most interesting part was talking about the changes that are going to be coming in the Mass itself.
I think some people are going to be a little resistant to it and frustrated, but for the most part, I think, just with time and repetition, we'll get used to it.
And hopefully, while these changes might be a little bit difficult because they're going to be a little different from the words that we're used to now, that ultimately it's going to help us to pray more deeply and be more unified with the whole church.
All right, well, stay tuned. There's much more Currents coming up. Coming up, ready or not, here it comes. The new Mass will be here just in time for Christmas.
It is a gift. Not every gift we get, we want it.
Welcome back. Well, as a broadcast news guy, I would kind of describe myself maybe as a jack of all trades. I know a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and I always kind of say that I'm kind of good at a lot of things, but not particularly great at any one thing, but I'm kind of good at a few different things. But that's just me. I'm, well versed in the news and trends of the day, but smart enough to know that when you want to drill down on a specific topic, that you've got to take your questions to the experts. Cue St. John's University. You like that over my shoulder? That was pretty cool, huh? Did that myself. Actually, that was somebody in the next room pushing a button. Every year, the university's Department of Theology and Religious Studies sponsors Three Things Catholics Should Know series. And one thing the university decided that Catholics should know this year is about the revised English translation of the third edition of the Roman Missal, i.e. the new Mass. You're sensing a theme here, aren't you? And the talk couldn't have come at a better time. We're only just weeks away now from implementing the Mass changes. And according to a study out of Georgetown University, after surveying 1,000 U.S. Catholics, a whopping 77% had no clue what they were talking about. Again, cue St. John's University.
Today we're having a series called the Three Things Talk about the revised edition of the Roman Missal. The three things are going to be kind of the history of what missals are in the church, a focus on this revised edition as gift and challenge, and then some practical applications about the revised edition.
Very often when we come into a conversation about the most recently revised English translation, we're sort of coming in the middle, if not the end of the conversation. So the piece of the presentation I was really trying to work with was, what is the background of the Roman Missal? When you're talking about the Missal, you are really talking about the Church's liturgy, and the Church's liturgy is its official prayer. In a sense, the Missal is actually a form of theologizing. When we pray from the Missal, we are actually praying what we believe. So I think the Missal is actually quite important to our identity as Roman Catholics.
This Missal was actually published in Latin in 2002, and it took almost 10 years to get the translation done and approved by all of the Episcopal conferences, because all the countries that speak English have to approve the same translation.
It seems to me that it was quite a substantially good revision. I tend to think is actually a better product. It draws much more greatly from the riches of the church, and its tradition of prayer.
It is a gift. Not every gift we get we wanted or we like, but it's still an opportunity for us to look again at our liturgical experience and deepen our experience of it.
My presentation, my part today, is the how-to nuts and bolts part. How do human beings who always say one thing, how do you help them say another? Usually the people are greeted by something like, "The Lord be with you," and the people come back, "and with your spirit." There's a gentleness and an intimacy that moves back and forth. St. Paul says, "Stir into flame the spirit that you received when I laid my hands on you." That little moment is to stir the spirit, is to stir the flame. And you've got to have something of yourself in it for that to happen.
I believe this is just one. This is a revision, and no doubt, probably in 40 or 50 years' time, we will look at this revision and raise questions about it. I will not be around for that, I presume, but when the time comes, we'll see, I think, further revisions. This is not the last word.
Well, stay with us. There is more Currents coming up. When we return, Brooklyn's Catholics have some new sounds to go with the new Mass.
It incorporates all the gospel music, all the classical music, and all the contemporary Christian music that I grew up with.
And finally tonight, I've got to ask you, what is a Mass without music? It's kind of a two-part question, though. What would the new Mass be without new music? The Vicariate of Black Catholic Concerns in the Brooklyn Diocese recently took up that deep theological question and answered it with the official rollout of composer Roger M. Holland's new Mass-approved The Sound of My People. Well, coming to a hymnal near you, The Sound of My People incorporates rhythms from the deep well of the African-American Christian tradition into the new music settings for use with the revised Roman Missal. In other words, Holland's sound makes the new Roman Missal sing and swing.
Way back on Calvary. Listen again.
What happened here today is we had two events in one day. We had a workshop where M. Roger Holland, who is a Black Catholic musician and liturgist, shared his new Mass setting for the newly revised sacramentary and the newly revised Mass. The other part of the day was a celebration of the liturgy with that new music so that we can get used to hearing it and using it in public worship together. What Roger did that was very powerful was he actually just started playing his own music and showing people how easy it was to pick up and how much fun it was to sing the music. The other thing that makes this easy is these are choirs and choir directors from around the diocese. They're used to having to learn and read music on the spot and begin to pick it up very quickly and to begin to rehearse it.
It's very beautiful. It incorporates all the gospel music, all the classical music, and all the contemporary Christian music that I grew up with. It's going to be great.
The music must really follow the rhythm of the text, and I was just so bothered by how incongruent the old setting was with the new text that I felt it was better to compose just a fresh setting that was really more organically wed to the text.
This music is going to be used in churches all over the country in the Universal Church. This is a monumental and historic moment for us that someone from Brooklyn and Queens, his contribution and how he's been enriched by the local church here growing up and as a musician is now being brought out to the Universal Church through this composition and the church's acceptance and approval of his particular Mass settings.
I felt that there was a great need for music that reflected the aesthetic and the traditions of African Americans, of the people of the African diasporic community. So I wanted to have something that reflected who we are as a people, and that's where the title of the Mass actually came from, The Sound of My People.
The beauty of African American music is that it's easily picked up by others, whether you're African American or a person of color or not, doesn't matter, because the rhythm has a soul, it has a texture, it has, we would call it in French, an élan vital that's just alive and dynamic and pulls you right in. It's amazing because a lot of people thought when the Vatican was asking for music to be revised to fit the new translations and to fit the new norms, many people thought it would meant a compromise of the vibrancy and the effervescence of our Catholic worship as it has evolved since Vatican II. But M. Roger Holland in his Sound of My People composition has proven that the Universal Church and its leadership, they're not looking to take away anything from the vibrancy and the vitality of the liturgy. They're looking for us to bring that vitality with more precise and well-rooted interpretations and translations in the liturgy. It is a big honor for us as Black Catholics, and not just Black Catholics, but all Catholics of Brooklyn and Queens. We all share in the glory of that moment, that the sound of our people here in Brooklyn and Queens is being respected at the national and international level in the church.
Gotta love that sound. What a way to end a holiday. And be forewarned now that you've heard this music and now that you've seen the show, having watched this entire show now, you're officially among the elite group of Catholics who are expecting the upcoming Mass changes. So bravo to you. And your education doesn't have to end here. You can actually head on over to our blog, Riding the Wave, over on our website, currentsny.net, for more. And you can check out NET's broadcast bulletin and the diocesan newspaper, The Tablet, for different talks around the diocese on the new Mass. So no excuses for you now. Spread the word. You know about it, okay? For all of us here at Currents, I'm Matt McClure. Thanks so much for watching tonight, and have a great one.